World War II. It was, without a doubt, the most devastating conflict in human history. But here's the thing, it didn't just happen overnight. It was more like a terrifying chain reaction, a series of dominoes, each one tipping the next. So to really understand how it all began, we can't start on the battlefield. No, we have to go back in time to a treaty that was supposed to guarantee peace forever. Right, so our story doesn't actually kick off in 1939. We're going back 20 years earlier, to 1919. World War I is finally over, and the winning nations are gathered to sign the Treaty of Versailles. This one document, this piece of paper designed to end all wars, well, it would instead set the stage for an even bigger, even more brutal one. You see, the biggest problem with the Treaty of Versailles was that it wasn't really about creating a lasting peace. For countries like Britain and France, it was about one thing: punishment. And they decided that one nation and one nation alone was going to take the blame for every single bit of devastation from the First World War: Germany. At the very heart of this treaty was Article 231, the infamous War Guilt Clause. Think of it as the legal fine print that justified everything that came next. By forcing Germany to accept 100% of the responsibility, the Allies could then force Germany to pay for 100% of the damages. And the bill they handed Germany was just staggering. In today's money, it would be around $270 billion. I mean, it was such an impossibly huge amount that Germany only made its final payment in 2010, nearly a century later. This wasn't just a fine, it was basically an economic death sentence, and it led directly to chaos. And this treaty had absolutely devastating effects inside Germany. The government, desperate to pay the fines, just started printing money. This completely crippled the economy, wiped out people's savings, and created the absolute perfect breeding ground for political extremism. It was a perfect storm. To really get what this felt like for an ordinary person, just look at the price of bread. Imagine this. You go to the store in 1922, and a loaf of bread costs 160 marks. Okay, you go back just 1 year later, and that exact same loaf of bread now costs 200 times billion marks. That's hyperinflation. Your money is completely worthless. People were desperate. And into this desperation steps Adolf Hitler. He just fed on all that national humiliation and economic despair. He even tried a coup in 1923. It failed, but it actually made him more popular. Then the Great Depression hits, making everything even worse. By 1933, using all that chaos as his ladder, he completely dismantled democracy and declared himself the absolute dictator of Germany. So, with total power, Hitler immediately starts tearing up the Treaty of Versailles. He starts acting on his ambitions. And the rest of the world? Well, they're still reeling from the last war, desperate to avoid another one. So they just kind of watch nervously. And that hesitation would turn out to be a fatal mistake. Hitler starts openly breaking all the rules. He builds an air force, the Luftwaffe. He starts rebuilding his navy. And, a lot of people in Britain actually felt the treaty had been way too harsh. So they adopted this policy of appeasement. They even signed a new naval agreement with him in 1935, officially letting him build up his navy. But all this did was make him bolder. The first domino to fall was Austria in 1938. Hitler claimed he was just uniting all German-speaking people. He used propaganda and political pressure to destabilize the country from the inside. So when he finally marched his troops in, it was a bloodless takeover. In fact, thanks to the propaganda, a lot of Austrians actually welcomed him. Next on the list was Czechoslovakia. At the famous Munich conference, Britain and France, still trying to avoid war at all costs, basically gave Hitler a piece of the country called the Sudetenland. They thought, okay, this will make him happy, this will be enough. But just a few months later, in March of 1939, Hitler broke his promise and took the rest of the country anyway. And that brings us to the final domino, Poland. Now, in a really stunning and cynical move, Hitler, who was a fierce anti-communist, signs a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. Why? Well, because they secretly agreed to carve up Poland between them. With the Soviets on his side, the path was clear. On September 1st, 1939, German troops stormed across the border. Now, Hitler's early success wasn't just about being aggressive. It was powered by a brand new, totally revolutionary military tactic. It was a strategy so fast, so overwhelming, that it left his enemies completely shocked, surrounded, and defeated, sometimes in just a matter of days. It was called Blitzkrieg, which is German for lightning war. And the entire philosophy was about avoiding the long, bloody trench warfare of World War I.
The goal was simple: speed, surprise, and a decisive knockout victory before the enemy even knew what hit them. And the formula was devastatingly effective. First, armored tanks, the panzers, would punch a hole right through the enemy lines. Second, they'd move with unbelievable speed, creating chaos deep in enemy territory. And third, all the while, the Luftwaffe would be pounding targets from the sky, causing panic and preventing reinforcements. But what was the secret behind the German army's almost superhuman endurance? Well, it's pretty shocking. Soldiers were given a drug called Pervitin, which we know today as crystal meth. This stuff allowed them to fight for days on end without sleep or hunger, pushing the whole Blitzkrieg strategy to its most terrifying limits. So after Poland fell, there was this strange, quiet period, which people called the phony war. But in the spring of 1940, that quiet came to a very violent end. Hitler turned his Blitzkrieg machine to the west, and an all-out assault on Europe began. The speed was just breathtaking. In April, Denmark and Norway fell. Then, on May 10th, the invasion of the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France all began at once. The policy of appeasement had completely failed. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain resigned, and Winston Churchill took his place. The French thought they were safe behind their Maginot Line, this massive string of fortifications. But Hitler didn't attack it head-on. In a brilliant and totally unexpected move, his main tank force went through the Ardennes forest, a place the Allies thought was completely impassable for tanks. They were wrong. And with that one move, the British and French armies were trapped against the sea at the port of Dunkirk. Facing total destruction, the Allies launched Operation Dynamo. A whole fleet of naval ships and ordinary civilian boats raced across the English Channel and, in what was really a miracle, rescued nearly 350,000 soldiers. But they had to leave almost all of their tanks, trucks, and heavy guns behind. With the Allied armies shattered and evacuated, there was nothing left to stand in Hitler's way. On June 22, 1940, France surrendered. By the summer of that year, it really looked like the war was already over, and Hitler was the undisputed master of Europe. I mean, just look at the list of conquered nations: Austria, Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and now France, all under Nazi control. Italy had joined him as an ally, and the Soviet Union had a peace pact with him. Only one major power was left standing in his way: Great Britain. So let's leave it with this thought. At this moment, with all of Europe conquered and America still on the sidelines, Britain stood completely alone. It looked like a total Nazi victory wasn't just possible, but probable. Was defeat for the Allies inevitable? Well, the story of what happened next is a tale for another time.